Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and each day I invite you to join me as we reflect on a significant moment from our shared past. Today is November 2nd, and we're looking back 108 years to November 2nd, 1917. On that day, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour sent a letter to Lord Walter Rothschild, a prominent British Zionist leader. The letter was just 67 words long. It contained a single diplomatic promise. Britain would support the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. That brief communication, which became known as the Balfour Declaration, would reshape the Middle East for the next century and beyond. The promise made in that letter still echoes through headlines today, through conflicts and peace negotiations, and through the lives of millions of people who trace their history to that single paragraph written in the midst of World War I. To understand the Balfour Declaration, we must first understand the desperate situation facing Britain in late 1917. The Great War has been grinding on for more than 3 years. Millions are dead. The Western Front is a hellish stalemate of trenches, barbed wire, and poison gas. Russia, Britain's ally, is collapsing into revolution. The Bolsheviks will seize power within days. The United States has only recently entered the war, and American troops haven't yet arrived in significant numbers. Britain is exhausted, financially strained, and searching for any advantage. The Ottoman Empire, controlling Palestine and much of the Middle East, has sided with Germany. Britain desperately wants Ottoman territory, not just for strategic reasons, but because the Suez Canal, Britain's lifeline to India, runs through the region. If Britain can encourage the Ottomans' collapse and position itself to control Palestine after the war, it solves multiple problems at once. Enter the Zionist movement. Since the late 1800s, Jewish leaders have advocated for a return to their ancestral homeland in Palestine. Theodor Herzl's vision of a Jewish state has gained traction among European Jews facing persistent anti-Semitism. By 1917, Zionist leaders like Chaim Weizmann, a brilliant chemist who has helped Britain's war effort, have the ear of British officials. They make their case: support Jewish settlement in Palestine, and you'll gain the gratitude of Jewish communities worldwide, particularly in Russia and America, whose support Britain desperately needs. British motivations are complex and not entirely noble. Some officials genuinely sympathize with Zionist aspirations. Others see strategic advantage. Still others hold anti-Semitic beliefs that Jews control global finance and can sway American opinion. The calculation is cynical but pragmatic. A public commitment to Zionism might help the war effort and position Britain favorably in the post-war Middle East. Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, drafts the statement carefully. Every word is debated in the British cabinet. Prime Minister David Lloyd George supports it. So does Balfour himself, who has long been interested in Zionism. Opposition comes from Edwin Montagu, the only Jewish member of the cabinet, who fears the declaration will fuel anti-Semitism and undermine Jewish citizens' loyalty to their home countries. His objections are noted but overruled. On November 2, 1917, Balfour sends the letter to Lord Rothschild. Here's what it says: His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. 67 words. Notice what it promises and what it doesn't. It supports a national home for Jewish people, not the national home, not a state, but a home in Palestine. It acknowledges existing non-Jewish communities, a remarkably vague phrase for the Arab population that comprises roughly 90% of Palestine's inhabitants. It promises that their civil and religious rights won't be prejudiced, but says nothing about their political rights or national aspirations. The declaration is deliberately ambiguous. Britain is making promises it may not be able to keep, using language designed to satisfy Zionists while theoretically protecting Arab interests. But in the context of 1917, with empires still confidently drawing lines on maps and determining the fate of peoples without their consent, this seems like standard diplomatic practice. The immediate impact is more symbolic than practical. The war continues. Palestine remains under Ottoman control for another year. But the psychological effect is profound. For Zionists, the Balfour Declaration represents the first major power endorsement of their cause. The dream of return suddenly has great power backing it. For Palestinian Arabs, the declaration is alarming, but not yet catastrophic. Many don't initially grasp its significance. The Ottoman Empire has ruled Palestine for 400 years. Surely this British letter won't change that. But after the war ends in 1918, British and Allied forces do take control of Palestine. In 1920, the League of Nations grants Britain a mandate to govern Palestine, explicitly incorporating the Balfour Declaration into its terms. What was a wartime promise becomes official international policy. Jewish immigration to Palestine increases dramatically. In 1918, Palestine's Jewish population is about 60,000 out of 700,000 total residents. By 1939, it grows to 450,000 out of 1.5 million. The immigrants bring capital, education, and European ideas about nationalism and statehood. They purchase land, establish agricultural settlements called kibbutzim, and build institutions like Hebrew University. They're creating facts on the ground, the infrastructure of a future state. Palestinian Arabs watch this transformation with growing alarm. Many work on Jewish-owned farms or benefit economically from development, but they also see their demographic and political position weakening. They petition British authorities. They protest. In 1936, they launch a major revolt that British forces brutally suppress. The Arabs argue, with considerable justice, that Britain has no right to promise their homeland to someone else. The Balfour Declaration, they insist, violated their right to self-determination. Britain finds itself trapped between incompatible promises. The British have also secretly promised the Arabs independence in exchange for their revolt against the Ottomans, the famous Lawrence of Arabia adventure. Britain has further promised France control over parts of the Middle East in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. These commitments contradict each other. Britain's attempt to balance them satisfies no one. Then comes World War II and the Holocaust. Hitler's systematic murder of 6 million Jews transforms the Zionist cause from a nationalist movement into a survival imperative. Jewish refugees desperately need somewhere to go. Many countries, including the United States, refuse to accept them in significant numbers. Palestine becomes the obvious destination. But Britain, trying to maintain Arab support during the war, restricts Jewish immigration precisely when it's most needed. After 1945, Jewish militant groups in Palestine turned violent against British rule. The British, exhausted by 6 years of war, can't maintain control. In 1947, Britain throws the problem to the newly formed United Nations. The UN votes to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international control. The Zionists accept the plan, though it gives them less than they want. The Arabs reject it entirely, viewing partition as legitimizing theft of their homeland. On May 14, 1948, as British forces withdraw, David Ben-Gurion declares the establishment of the State of Israel. Immediately, surrounding Arab nations attack. Israel survives the war and even expands its territory. But roughly 700,000 Palestinian Arabs flee or are expelled from their homes, creating a refugee crisis that persists today. Palestinians call this the Nakba, the catastrophe. The conflict has continued for 76 years. Multiple wars, peace agreements that don't hold, intifadas, settlements in occupied territories, rocket attacks, security barriers, checkpoints, and periodic violent escalations. Millions of people, Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and Palestinian refugees in neighboring countries, live with the consequences of decisions made decades ago, starting with that 67-word letter in 1917. The Balfour Declaration's legacy extends beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It represents a particular moment in history when European powers felt entitled to redraw the Middle East according to their interests, with minimal concern for local populations. Britain and France carved up the region into mandate territories that became Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and others. Many of these borders made little sense ethnically or geographically. They were drawn to serve imperial interests. This colonial map-making has had lasting effects. Many Middle Eastern conflicts, civil wars, ethnic tensions, disputes over resources can be traced to borders and political arrangements imposed by outside powers. The Balfour Declaration is perhaps the most consequential example, but it's part of a broader pattern. Today, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the world's most intractable problems. Proposed solutions, 2 states, 1 state, confederation, all face enormous obstacles. Israeli security concerns are real. Palestinian grievances are legitimate. Hardliners on both sides reject compromise. International involvement often makes things worse. The conflict has resisted resolution because it involves fundamental questions. Who has the right to this land? How do you balance competing historical claims? Can past injustices ever be truly rectified, or must we simply find a way forward? What can we learn from the Balfour Declaration over a century later? First, diplomatic promises have consequences that outlive the diplomats who make them. Balfour and Lloyd George acted with short-term strategic goals during a desperate war. They probably didn't envision the century of conflict their letter would help create. Yet millions of people today live with the results. This reminds us that foreign policy decisions, especially those involving territorial control and national identity, cast long shadows. Second, vague language in agreements stores up trouble for the future. The Balfour Declaration's ambiguity, a national home rather than a state, acknowledging Arab rights without specifying what that means, was deliberate. It allowed Britain to claim it was honoring both Jewish and Arab interests when those interests were actually incompatible. Diplomatic ambiguity sometimes enables agreement, but it often just postpones conflict. Third, colonial powers' habit of making decisions about other people's homelands without meaningful consultation has left a bitter legacy. The Balfour Declaration didn't ask Palestinians what they wanted for their future. It simply declared Britain's support for a policy that would fundamentally transform their homeland. This pattern, powerful countries deciding the fate of less powerful peoples, has caused immense suffering and resentment. Finally, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict demonstrates how historical grievances, once established, become incredibly difficult to resolve. Both Israelis and Palestinians can point to historical injustices. Both have suffered terribly. Both have legitimate needs and fears. But these competing narratives make compromise feel like betrayal. How do you split the difference between two peoples who both claim the same land as their rightful ancestral home? There's no easy answer, which is why the conflict persists. So that's November 2nd, 1917. The day Arthur Balfour sent a 67-word letter that seemed, at the time, like a reasonable wartime diplomatic maneuver. A letter that promised British support for a Jewish homeland while vaguely protecting Arab rights. A letter that reflected the imperial confidence of its era, the assumption that Britain could remake the Middle East according to its interests and everything would work out fine. It didn't work out fine. The Balfour Declaration helped set in motion a conflict that has claimed countless lives, displaced millions of people, and resisted every attempt at resolution. It stands as a reminder that even seemingly small diplomatic decisions can have enormous, lasting consequences, that promises made without full understanding of their implications can bind future generations to conflicts they didn't choose, that the lines powerful nations draw on maps represent real people, real homes, and real lives disrupted. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The lesson of the Balfour Declaration isn't that Britain was uniquely evil or that the conflict was inevitable. It's that good intentions, strategic calculations, and diplomatic convenience are not enough when making decisions that will affect millions of people for generations. We must think more carefully about the long-term consequences of our choices, especially when those choices involve promising other people's homelands to third parties. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Richard Backus, and I'll be back tomorrow with another story from our shared past.